My name is Sarah Bennett. I'm 31 years old, and just 3 days ago, I went through an emergency C-section to bring my beautiful daughter, Lily, into this world. When my husband, Mark, drove me home from the hospital, I expected relief. I expected to crawl into my own bed and finally breathe again. Instead, the second we pulled into the driveway, my mother-in-law, Evelyn, was already standing on the front porch with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Beside her stood my father-in-law, Richard, wearing that same indifferent expression like none of this had anything to do with him. Before I could even step through the front door, Evelyn slammed it shut right in my face and turned the deadbolt. Then she reached over, grabbed my packed baby bag off the porch, and tossed it across the damp driveway without a second thought. "There's no room in this house for a useless wife," she spat, her icy voice cold enough to freeze the summer air. I stood there completely stunned, clutching my crying newborn against my chest while every muscle in my abdomen screamed in pain. My stitches felt like they were ripping apart with every breath I took. Then Evelyn demanded that I hand over every penny of my maternity leave savings immediately to cover rent for staying under her roof. When I refused to give up the only financial safety net I had left, she decided my time was up. I turned toward Mark, waiting, hoping he'd finally step in and protect his wife and his newborn daughter. But no way. He couldn't even look me in the eye. Instead, he stared down at his shoes like the coward he'd always been. They honestly believed they'd taken everything from me, my home, my dignity, and my future. But what Evelyn didn't realize was that her cruel little ultimatum was about to unleash a storm she never saw coming. The cold rain started falling, mixing with the sweat running down my forehead as I stood there shivering on the concrete driveway. Lily was crying harder now, her tiny lungs fighting against the bitter chill, and every heartbreaking scream felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I pulled her closer, wrapping my thin jacket around her tiny body, trying my best to shield her from the rain. But the pain from my fresh surgery was becoming unbearable. It seriously felt like my body was being torn apart from the inside out. I looked at Mark again, my voice shaking with exhaustion and desperation. "Mark, please, do something. Look at your daughter. She's freezing. We need to go inside." He finally lifted his head, but there wasn't an ounce of love or protection in his eyes. Only the same weak obedience he'd always shown his mother. "Just give her the savings, Sarah," he muttered flatly. "You're making this a way bigger deal than it needs to be. Mom just wants to know we're pulling our weight. If you'd stop being so stubborn, apologize, and hand over the money, she'd let us back inside in a heartbeat. You're bringing this on yourself." Seriously. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. From behind the glass, Evelyn watched my misery with a smug grin stretched across her face. She honestly thought she'd broken me. She believed I was completely alone, helpless, and out of options. They expected me to drop to my knees, beg for forgiveness, and hand over every dollar I had just to survive the night. But as I stared at my husband's cowardly face, something inside me changed. The frightened, broken woman they thought they could control disappeared. In her place stood a mother. And this mama wasn't about to let anybody mess with her child. Just as my knees started to buckle from the overwhelming pain, the deep rumble of an engine echoed down the quiet suburban street. A sleek black sedan pulled up directly behind Mark's car, its headlights slicing through the pouring rain. The rear passenger door swung open, and my mother, Helena, stepped out. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't crying. She looked calm, almost ice-cold. Her expression was carved in stone, radiating the kind of authority that made people think twice before opening their mouths. Walking beside her was a tall man carrying a thick leather briefcase. His name was Mr. Vance. He happened to be one of the toughest real estate attorneys in the entire city, and trust me, this guy didn't play around. Mark blinked in confusion as my mother hurried over to me. Without saying another word, she wrapped a warm, dry blanket around Lily before gently guiding me toward the heated interior of her car. "Get inside, Sarah," she whispered firmly, locking eyes with me. "I've got this. Trust me." Before Evelyn or Mark could even figure out what was happening, Helena and Mr. Vance marched straight up the porch steps. Evelyn cracked the front door open just enough to glare at them, her smug little sneer returning. "Helena, what the heck is this?" she snapped. "Get off my property before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." Mr. Vance didn't even blink. He calmly unzipped his briefcase, pulled out an official document bearing a large golden seal, and stepped a little closer to Evelyn. "I'd strongly advise against calling the police, Mrs. Miller," Mr. Vance said, his voice sharp enough to echo off the brick walls. "Because if anyone is trespassing here, it's you." Evelyn's smug smile vanished. Mr. Vance continued without missing a beat. "This property does not belong to you or your husband." He held the document higher. "It never has." For the first time since I'd known her, Evelyn looked genuinely rattled. A nervous twitch flickered across her jaw. Mr. Vance opened the file. 15 years ago, Sarah's late father legally purchased this property and leased it to you through a private agreement administered by Helena Bennett. He paused just long enough for the words to sink in. "Legally speaking, you are tenants, Mrs. Miller." Another pause. "And as of exactly 5 minutes ago." He looked directly into her eyes. "Your lease has officially been terminated." The color drained from Evelyn's face so fast it was almost unbelievable. Her hands began trembling as she stared at the paperwork. "That's impossible," she shouted. "It's a lie. Richard and I have lived here for 15 years. We paid for this house." My mother finally spoke. Her voice stayed calm, controlled, and absolutely unshaken. "No, Evelyn. You paid rent." The silence that followed was deafening. "Rent that was heavily discounted because my late husband felt sorry for your family's financial situation." She took one slow step closer. "You confused kindness with ownership." Another step. "And you mistook my silence for weakness." Evelyn's mouth opened, but no words came out. She spun toward Mark in complete panic. "Mark," she yelled. "Tell them they're wrong. Tell this lawyer he's lying. Say something." Mark stood frozen in the driveway like a deer caught in headlights. But he couldn't even look his own mother in the eye. Mr. Vance adjusted his glasses before reaching into his briefcase once again. "Actually," he said calmly, "Mr. Miller has known about this arrangement for years." Mark's head slowly dropped. 2 years ago, he signed the lease renewal as an official witness. The silence became even heavier. He knew his parents never owned this property. Mr. Vance looked at Mark with obvious disgust. Yet he allowed his wife to believe otherwise and stood by while she was thrown out onto the street under completely false pretenses. "From inside my mother's car," I gasped. I couldn't believe it. Mark had known. The entire time. He'd let his mother parade around like she owned everything, treating me like garbage for years, while the whole foundation of her power was nothing more than one massive lie. Mr. Vance wasn't finished. He pulled out another document. "Furthermore," he continued, stepping even closer to Evelyn, "your lease clearly states that any attempt to unlawfully lock out a member of the landlord's immediate family." He glanced toward me sitting in the car with Lily. "Or any failure to pay municipal property taxes." He looked back at Evelyn. "Which records show you are currently 3 years behind on." His voice became even firmer. "Constitutes an immediate breach of contract." He slowly closed the folder. "Mrs. Miller, you violated every single term of that agreement." Evelyn's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Every ounce of that arrogant confidence she'd been wearing just moments earlier vanished. The quiet neighborhood suddenly felt eerily silent as the crushing weight of reality came crashing down around her. She staggered backward, gripping the porch railing so tightly her knuckles turned white, as if the house itself were slipping through her fingers. And honestly, it was. "You can't do this to us," she shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. "Richard, get out here. They're trying to steal our home." Richard hurried to the front door, but the instant he spotted the official legal seal on Mr. Vance's documents and the unwavering determination in my mother's eyes, his expression completely changed. His face went blank. He knew exactly who Mr. Vance was. He also knew they didn't have a legal leg to stand on. Without saying a word, Mr. Vance reached into his folder one last time and pulled out another document. He handed it directly to Richard. Because you failed to pay over 3 years of municipal property taxes totaling more than $20,000, he said calmly, and because you unlawfully locked my client's daughter out of this residence while she was recovering from major surgery. We've obtained an emergency order requiring you to vacate the property immediately. Evelyn's eyes widened. An emergency order, she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. What does that even mean? Mr. Vance looked at her without the slightest hint of sympathy. His voice dropped into a cold, unyielding tone. It means, Mrs. Miller, you have exactly 24 hours to pack your personal belongings and return every key to this property. He paused just long enough for the message to sink in. If you're still here by 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, local law enforcement will remove you for criminal trespassing, and Mrs. Bennett will pursue every legal charge available, including property tax fraud. The porch went completely silent. Even the rain seemed quieter. Evelyn stared through the rain-streaked window straight at me. Just 20 minutes earlier, she'd been standing there with that smug grin after throwing my baby's clothes onto the lawn like they were trash. Now, that cruel smile was gone. The woman glaring at me wasn't powerful anymore. She wasn't confident. She was terrified. For the first time, she realized her own arrogance had destroyed everything she'd spent years pretending to own. She'd tried to ruin my life. Instead, she'd destroyed her own. My mother gave Mr. Vance a small nod before turning back toward the car. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and quietly pulled away from the curb. As we drove off, I looked back one last time. Mark, Evelyn, Richard. All three of them stood frozen beneath the porch light, completely speechless. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. They simply stood there in absolute shock as the truth settled over them. And that was the last time I ever left that house feeling powerless. Instead, I drove away knowing their world had just come crashing down, big time. I never spent another night in that house. And honestly, I never looked back. With Mr. Vance's help, I moved into a quiet, peaceful apartment paid for entirely with my own savings, the very money Evelyn had been so desperate to get her hands on. The very next morning, I signed the paperwork to begin divorce proceedings against Mark. I also filed for full legal and physical custody of Lily, along with maximum child support. When Mark finally realized just how badly he'd messed up, he tried everything to make things right. He called me over and over again, dozens of times every single day. He left tearful voicemails, begging me to give him another chance. He swore he was sorry. He insisted he'd only been caught in the middle. He even told me his parents were now living in a tiny, run-down motel because they couldn't afford to rent a decent place anymore. But here's the thing. I blocked his number. Every single one. Mark hadn't been caught in the middle. Not even close. He picked his side the moment he stood there and watched his wife, just days after major surgery, and his newborn daughter freeze in the pouring rain without saying a word. That wasn't weakness. That was a choice. And every choice comes with consequences. During the divorce settlement, Mark was forced to surrender his rights to our marital assets to help offset the years of unpaid rent his parents still owed my mother. Within 6 months, our divorce was finalized. Evelyn and Richard had no choice but to liquidate nearly everything they had to cover their massive tax debt. Eventually, they ended up moving into a worn-down one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The woman who once acted like she owned a beautiful home now barely had enough space to unpack her boxes. As for Mark, he lost everything. No house, no savings, no marriage, no family left to hide behind. The comfort he fought so hard to protect disappeared overnight. Meanwhile, I had reclaimed complete control over my life, my finances, and most importantly, my daughter's future. 1 year later, I sat in the bright, sunlit living room of my new home in Carmel, watching little Lily take her very first steps across the hardwood floor. She laughed as she wobbled toward me with both tiny arms stretched wide. I scooped her into my embrace, holding her close as a deep sense of peace settled over me. That freezing, rain-soaked evening felt like it had happened in another lifetime. The scars remained, but the pain no longer controlled me. What stayed with me was the lesson. Cruelty, greed, deceit. They always come back to the person who chooses them. Evelyn tried to throw me away like I didn't matter, believing it would prove she was in control. Instead, her own greed cost her the very roof over her head. Mark believed staying silent would protect his comfortable life. Instead, his cowardice cost him his marriage, his daughter, and the future he could have had. Standing up for myself wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But looking back now, it was also the best decision I ever made. Sometimes walking away isn't losing. Sometimes it's exactly how you win. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What would have you done if you were standing in my shoes? Have you ever had to deal with toxic in-laws or someone who thought they could control your life? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below and let me know what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely love to see how far this story has reached. And if this story kept you hooked, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. Thanks so much for watching, y'all. I'll see you in the next one.